excited to join you all today. And I'm going to switch. There we are. Hi, everyone. And I have a couple of things I want to show you today. So I'm going to play a little bit on the computer today. But first, I want to say thank you all for coming. I really, really appreciate everyone who joins. This is such a fun experience for me to get to share my thoughts and my frameworks and how things are coming together for me. So I really appreciate everyone who is joining me and who is participating. So today we are going to be talking about emotional and behavioral intentionality for cultural impact, and specifically how regulation and our daily habits shape trust, tone, and team culture. And we have talked about this in our last two newsletters, but if you're not familiar, our newsletters is called The Conscious Leader. And we are covering over the next year my 6 books in my book series called the Leadership Consciousness Essentials book series. And we are currently in book 2, which is Conscious Intentionality. And in this book, we are covering the 6 dimensions. And let me put this up here for you. We're covering the 6 dimensions of conscious intentionality, and these basically are just domains that influence our habitual patterns. And in the last few newsletters, we have covered emotional intentionality and behavioral intentionality, and that is what we're going to be focusing on here today. So you can see here the emotions and the behaviors as part of this framework. And just as background, if you have not been following the newsletter or the series, intentionality is the practice of acting with purpose and clarity so that you can make choices that are aligned with your values and your desired outcomes. And this is really just about being honest and deliberate across these 6 domains that are going to help you in your leadership. And so to get us back to the topic today, we're going to be covering emotional intentionality and behavioral intentionality today. And so we covered emotional presence in the previous newsletter and how that shapes our trust and safety. And then in our last newsletter, we covered how micro behaviors are going to reinforce or contradict your values. Today, we're going to be bringing these 2 concepts together. And I think probably everyone who's joining knows that culture is not shaped by mission statements or by strategy decks, but is shaped by how the people in those systems operate and interact with others. And give me just one moment here. My doggy is making noises. And okay, so we're going to be talking today about how culture is shaped by your intentions, in your behaviors, and in your emotions. And so today we're going to talk about how our emotions consistently basically impact our behaviors and how we can regulate our nervous system so that we can choose better behaviors. And yeah, so we're going to talk about how our unprocessed emotions will kind of leak into our tone, into our presence, into our posture, and into our decision making if we are not consciously aware of it. We're going to talk about why emotional regulation is necessary for clarity and for timing for us to be able to choose better behaviors. We're going to talk about how micro behaviors kind of compound into larger cultural patterns and how that sets the context for your general culture, for your team or for your organization. We'll talk about the connection between emotional steadiness and behavioral integrity. And finally, we'll talk about a quick practice to help you make sure that you're in alignment with your values that you have. And so specifically, we'll talk about different emotions that you experience in your workplace, how those emotions influence the behaviors that you have, and how your behaviors are visibly expressing your values. And the core content that you'll get from today is that emotional intention is going to create the conditions for you to respond in alignment with your values, and then your behavioral integrity, whether or not you act in alignment with those values, is what is going to reinforce the culture. So if you are ready to move into this, we're going to talk about how this internal awareness becomes a visible alignment. So to start us off, what I want to do is I want us to kind of come together and have a quick moment to just ground and settle. If you followed my work before, you know that this is a really, really important practice. So anytime you come into deep and intentional work, you need to make sure that your nervous system is ready for it and can manage it. And so what I want you to do is just kind of, wherever you're at, whether you're seated, whether you're laying, whether you're walking, I want you to just pause for a moment and to check in with yourself. Take a long, slow breath. And as you exhale, I want you to just let go of whatever thoughts, whatever emotions, or whatever background noise is existing in your world right now. And I want you to just sit with your intention of understanding how your emotional and your behavioral intentionality influences your leadership. And from here, I want us to slowly move into these two dimensions. So emotional intentionality and behavioral intentionality. And we're going to hopefully bring these together in a way that is going to give you some real practical experience for your lived daily leadership. And so in our past newsletters, we talked about how our emotions are really critical leadership data, and that those kind of emotional triggers are going to signal to us where we need to take action. And if we can learn to listen to those triggers, then we can learn to consciously choose behaviors that are better in alignment with our values. And yeah, so let's start by kind of bringing these two concepts together. We had two separate newsletters on these two separate topics, but really these two topics influence each other. And so when we talk about shaping culture, our culture is going to be shaped by how we feel, how present we are when we show up, how we are able to regulate our nervous systems in the moments that matter, and how we consciously choose to act in various circumstances. And in order to consciously choose, we have to first be able to recognize and acknowledge our emotions and how they're impacting our thoughts and our behaviors. So, sorry. Anytime that our nervous system is dysregulated, it is going to impact us. And regardless of whether or not we want to believe it or accept it as truth, those lingering emotions are going to kind of seep out into our behaviors. And what we want you to do is we want you to be able to recognize when that is happening. Ideally in the moment, but even if you're not able to recognize it in the moment, we want you to at least be able to acknowledge that it did happen, so that then you can go back and repair any harm that may have occurred in those circumstances. And that's where we're going to start today, is the intersection between our inner world, so our thoughts and our emotions, and how that impacts our outer world, which are the behaviors that we're going to exhibit after kind of figuring out what's happening on the inside. Now, our emotional steadiness is what is going to create the conditions for trust, but our behavioral integrity is what is going to reinforce it. When I say behavioral integrity here, I mean, do your behaviors align with your values? And if the answer to that question is yes, then you are in alignment. If the answer to that question is no, then that is where we have to go back and make sure that we are choosing behaviors that are in alignment with our values. And so let's start with our emotions, right? Too often our leadership development is focused on emotions as something negative, something that we have to suppress, or at least kind of suspend so that we can maintain our professionalism. But the reality is that those emotions are always at play. And the more we suppress them or we try and push them down, the more they're going to seep out unconsciously in our behaviors and in our habits. And the goal of today is to help you to understand not to suppress those emotions, but to say, I'm having this emotion. And this emotion could be tied to any of these things. And I want to put that in that context instead of bringing it into my behaviors and my actions and my decisions for the future. And so, again, the lens or the reframe that we want you to bring to today's conversation is that emotions are critical leadership data. Anytime you have an emotion, it is signaling something to you. Whether it is right or whether it is wrong doesn't matter. What matters is that you recognize you have an emotional response, and that you can consciously say, this is this emotional response. It may or may not be because of any of these things. And all of that contextual data is going to come into play. But what we want you to be able to do is say, this is here. It's important. As I move forward with my next steps, I do not want to bring this baggage into this conversation or into this decision or whatever the circumstance is. And we want to create conscious choice. So when we think about conscious choice in that context, emotions are critical leadership data. That's the first main point for us today. And our emotions are going to reveal what is most important to us. They're going to signal anytime a boundary that we have is crossed. It's going to signal when one of our values is not being met, or when we feel like other people should be contributing in certain ways. And sometimes it will signal things like broken trust or trust that needs to be restored. And so anytime we have an emotional trigger, we want to pause and try and dig back a little bit to understand what that emotion is trying to tell us. So what is the emotion? What is it related to? What is it trying to tell me about this situation that I'm in right now? And when we want to try to bring intentionality to our emotions and our leadership, I want to first just encourage you to see your emotions as an invitation. Your emotions are an invitation to capitalize on your leadership presence. And so if I have an emotion, let's say I am frustrated because I've had to repeat myself several times, and my internal dialogue is, these people never listen to me. I'm really annoyed. I can't stand that I'm constantly having to repeat myself, right? I can say, okay, I'm having this frustration that is coming up for me in this moment, and then putting it into the proper context. Is there a need to be frustrated? Like, how has this person been in the last 6 meetings where I've shared this? Yes or no? Maybe someone was on leave and they didn't hear, or they didn't read their emails, or like whatever the circumstances, putting it into the appropriate context. And then also saying, is my reaction appropriate to the context, right? So if I'm getting frustrated because I've had to repeat myself, let's say 6 times, as a leader, my job is to make sure that people have the critical information that they need. And if I have to repeat myself 6 times or 10 times, it doesn't matter, right? And so is my response, my behavioral response, in alignment with the context? And so if we can recognize those emotions, that gives us the context to capitalize on our presence and how we respond in the moment. Now, of course, how we kind of respond in those moments is what's going to set the context and define the culture, not just of your team, but of your entire organization. And so, of course, you are probably not the only leader in your organization, and how other leaders respond are also going to influence the context. But if you've got a majority of people in leadership positions who are short and dismissive and don't want to listen to what other people say, or they're constantly frustrated, that dynamic is going to leak out. And what I want you all to understand is you always have the ability to shape and influence your cultural dynamics just by being present and bringing emotional and behavioral alignment to different circumstances. And so anytime we are not in alignment with our kind of emotional responses or our actual behavioral responses, that is going to impact the dynamic of the teams that we're participating in. And whether or not it's in a good way or a bad way is irrelevant right now. I think the most important thing is just to recognize that it's going to impact that. And if we can catch those triggers early enough, then we might be able to prevent our frustration from becoming shortness with the people that we're interacting with. We might be able to prevent our anxiety from turning into micromanagement, or to prevent our resentment from turning into like avoidance, like not even wanting to deal with them because you just resent them for whatever reason, right? And so if we can recognize that we're having those triggers, then we can say, if I value inclusion, regardless of whether or not I carry resent for someone, I still have to treat them the same as I treat everyone else, right? And recognizing that can help you to put that into context. And I struggle with this quite a bit. Everyone struggles with this. And so if you're at a place where you're like, yeah, this is all really great information, but how do I actually do it? We're going to get there in a moment. Okay. So let's say the goal for today is to help you to understand that if we don't bring emotional intention into our leadership, we're never going to have that foundation of emotional presence that is required to lead in the ways that we want. And so our thoughts and our emotions are the foundation of everything that we do, because that is what is going to create our behaviors and our behavioral patterns that are going to influence the larger context. And so we're not going to talk about thoughts today because we talked about that in our last newsletter. But today we're going to focus on the emotions and the behaviors. And so if we can catch the emotions that we're having, regulate our nervous system so that we're not in fight or flight, kind of wanting to go to bat in the moment. If we can regulate our nervous system, then we bring in the option for conscious choice, and we can say, what is the best way for me to respond in this moment? Whether that is, I need to pause, I need to take a deep breath, and I need to respond as calmly as possible in a lower tone or a higher tone, whatever the tone is that might be necessary for that moment. Just creating that space to say, how can I consciously choose to move forward in a way that is most beneficial for everyone? All right. So what does it mean to bring attention to our emotions? So the most important thing here is that our emotions are not neutral. There's no such thing as being emotionally neutral to any circumstance that you encounter. You are always going to have something that is going to trigger you, even sometimes from decades ago. And the most important skill that you can learn is to recognize when you have those emotional triggers. So having the body awareness of the physiological responses that are happening, that are triggering to you, that you have an emotional response that is telling you something, and using that information to then capitalize on your leadership. So choosing the best way forward that is in alignment with your leadership style and desires. And so what does it mean? It means to intentionally feel and acknowledge what you're feeling. It means to learn how to name those feelings and those emotions without judgment, to trace those emotions back to their root cause or as close as you can get in the moment, recognizing whatever underlying belief or feelings that may be associated with that, and then putting that into the proper context so that you can choose how to respond with conscious intention. So to give you a little bit more of a concrete example here, let's say that someone challenges your idea and something inside of you immediately is like, why are you challenging me right now in this moment with all of these people? Right? And maybe it feels like a threat to your credibility. Maybe it feels like something else, but you notice in your body that, either your jaw tightens, your eyebrows do something, your mouth does something, or your heart starts racing. Maybe you have what's it called, a rash that comes up on your body because you're trying to manage your emotions, right? This is the invitation for you. As soon as you start to have that defensive feeling, right, that is your emotion saying, wait, something's not in alignment here, we need you to adjust. Right, so as soon as you have that moment, that is your invitation. So instead of reacting unconsciously to whatever's happening, instead of saying, I told you 6 times, I don't want to tell you again, right? That would be an emotional reaction. And so pausing and saying, okay, was this person in the last meeting that we had? Yes or no? Was this person out for any reason? Why might this person not understand? And even if they were in the meetings, what might be preventing them from having this message sink in so that you can respond in a more kind way? Maybe they're struggling with, their kids in the hospital, or their parents are aging, like whatever it is. Maybe that they've just been distracted. And so if you can bring that context into your mind in that moment, then that gives you a little bit more wiggle room to bring empathy into your behavioral dynamics, right? And so you pause, you take a breath instead of reacting, and you just notice. Why do I feel threatened right now? Are they trying to threaten my integrity, my character? Are they trying to make me look like I don't know what I'm talking about? So questioning all of those things in the moment. And then reminding yourself what your values are. And so for me, my values are kindness and authenticity and empathy. And so if those are my values, what I will do in this circumstance is remind myself, how do I respond in this moment with kindness and with authenticity? And instead of saying, hey, I told you 6 times, I really need you to listen to what I tell you, I could say, pause, breathe, and then say, I know we had this conversation last week. We had the conversation the week before. I'm not sure why you're not able to take that information into account, but I want to make sure that you're able to get this because this is really important for us. It's really important for our team. It's really important for, our contract, whatever it is. Bring that context into play here and say, how can I help you right now? Right? That would be a more kind and authentic way to respond other than, I told you 6 times, I really need you to get this, get it and move on, right? All right. And so the next thing I want to talk about is how do we bring this into our actions and in our behaviors? And so we're going to talk in the 4th book about pause and how critical pause is to navigating some of these things. And of course, you have to have some sort of pause integrated into your practice in order to manage your nervous system. But I don't want to get into that too much. All I want for you to think about right now is, how do you notice the triggers in your body, and how do you notice the emotions that come up for you? Because if you cannot notice those emotions, then you can't take any of the rest of the steps. And so how do you notice those things? And when you do notice those things, what is going to help you to regulate your nervous system so that you can bring that conscious choice back into alignment? For me, it's a slow, deep breath. That's usually the example that I give, but for you, it may be something else. And so we're not going to talk about how to regulate your nervous system in this discussion, but I have a course on regulating your nervous system. It's free. It's on YouTube. Anyone can watch it. And I also have plenty of other resources on how to regulate your nervous system as well. And so how do you notice your triggers? How do you regulate your nervous system so that you can bring conscious choice in? And then how do you choose to move forward? This is emotional and behavioral intentionality in action. This is everything that we're talking about today. Now, you can't do any of these things unless you have a foundational awareness of your body. And what do I mean by that? I mean, how do you understand what is happening in your body? Are you able to recognize when you're grinding your teeth or when your heart is racing? Are you able to recognize when pressure starts mounting in your body? Are you able to recognize any nervous tics that happen? And what do you do with that information when you do notice it happening in your body, right? And so this is probably one of the most important aspects of intentionality in terms of being able to act on our intentions. And so if you don't have any foundational awareness of what's happening physiologically in your body, then I would encourage you to check out, it doesn't have to be my resources, but check out resources on how to regulate, first how to notice your reactions in your body, and then how to regulate your body when those moments happen. Because anytime we have an emotional trigger, it's triggering our fight or flight. And it doesn't matter how old those emotional wounds are, that fight or flight is always going to kick in, and our body is going to realize it before our brain does. And so if we can catch those triggers right at the moment of our body, then we can bypass the cognitive part altogether. And so if we know that when our heart starts racing, it's telling us something about an emotional trigger that we need to be aware of, then we can jump right to what is the emotion, what is the trigger, what do I need to think about as I move forward. And we don't have to think about our behaviors as an afterthought. I'm exhibiting this behavior because I was emotionally triggered in that circumstance, right? So if we can learn how to respond to our body, then we're responding in the moment that it's happening, instead of cognitively reflecting back on, I had an emotional response, I unconsciously reacted in a way that I don't think is in alignment with my values, and I want to adjust, right? Now, I think I'm going to leave that there. And so again, lots of resources on body awareness and nervous system regulation and those kinds of things in my resources. And actually, after this video, I will put some of them down in the comments for you all if you want to check them out. Okay, so let's see. Let's do a little mini reflection. And so what I want you to do is to take maybe about 30 seconds, and I want you to think quietly about two things. First, what emotion most often shows up for you in your leadership that shapes how you respond under pressure? So what is the actual emotion that shows up most for you? And the second thing is, how does that emotion normally show up in your body, in your tone, and in your behavior? And so what is happening in your body when you're feeling or experiencing that emotion? And then how does it shape how you respond to people in your leadership? Now, you don't have to share this with anyone right now. What I want you to do is I just want you to notice, what are the emotions that most often shape you? And how does it show up? And again, like I said before, this is the first step. So you can't do anything else unless you can notice these. And what I want to do now is I want to sort of transition into the behavioral aspects of this. And so again, that emotional intentionality is the foundation, because we can't shape our behaviors unless we are tracking what is consciously or unconsciously guiding them. And so again, what we feel internally is going to externally influence our behaviors. And if we can consciously choose behaviors that are based on our emotional insights and our values, then we're going to be in a better position to lead the people that we're working with. So let's talk about behaviors. Behaviors are the visible patterns that people see and experience from your leadership. So whether or not you are gifted at being able to articulate your values, people are never going to assume that your values are what you say they are. And so they are going to watch you and they are going to experience what it is like to be on the receiving end of your behaviors. And from that context, they are going to determine what your values actually are. And so if you can bring coherence or congruence into your habitual behaviors that are in alignment with your values, then you're going to set the stage for not just telling people what your values are, but demonstrating it every single day. And this is what your credibility is actually built on as a leader, right? It's built on what you repeatedly demonstrate every day in your interactions. So I know we talked about this quite a lot. I'm going to say it one more time because it's worth saying, and that is that many people assume that culture is shaped by these policies or these large decisions or milestones that people have in their companies or their organizations. But the reality is that culture is formed in the subtle and repeated interactions that define their everyday experience. And you as a leader are the model for what those everyday interactions look like, and how you navigate conflict, how you listen to people or dismiss their ideas, how you recognize people for their contributions, and how you handle mistakes are what is going to teach people what matters in your teams. And now these micro behaviors are going to compound over time, and they're going to form the pattern that becomes your reputation as a leader, and ultimately the cultural dynamics of the team and the organization. And so, do you listen without interrupting people? Or do you try and finish people's sentences? Do you follow through on the things that you say that you're going to do? Do you respond with curiosity when you're challenged, or does your defensiveness automatically take over? Are you able to make space for other people's perspectives that are different from yours, especially when they are directly contradicting you? Can you admit your own mistakes and use them to demonstrate growth opportunities? Can you respond calmly and compassionately when someone irks you the wrong way? Right? Now, all of these things are the kind of culmination of the lived experiences that people are going to have with you. And they are what people are going to carry into their everything, right? And so their team dynamics, their meeting dynamics, the organizational dynamics. And if any of those things are not in alignment, then that incongruence is going to impact your leadership credibility and whether or not people can trust you in those moments. And so I think this is where these two dimensions become really, really important. Now, we're not going to talk about congruence in this session today because we talk about congruence as part of the third book, and we're going to do a whole series on that. But what I want you to understand is that anytime your behaviors and your actions do not match your values, there's an incongruence. And that incongruence is what is going to impact your trust and your credibility. And it's what's going to influence the cultural dynamics. And so what we need you to understand if you're in a leadership position is that how you externally respond in that split second when you have an emotional reaction is where your behavioral integrity is either going to be upheld or it's going to slip. And if your pattern is to emotionally respond or to slip up, then that incongruence is going to teach people that you are not trustworthy, right? Now, this is what behavioral integrity means, right? It means like transforming our emotional awareness into relational steadiness by aligning our actions with our values. And this is the bridge between what you understand internally and what you express externally. And so if your inner presence is not fully together, then that outward expression of your presence is going to be impacted. And if there's not alignment there, then that is automatically going to create distrust in your dynamics. And so what I want to do is I want to pose a couple of questions for you as we get ready to close out here about your behavioral integrity. And I want you to think about this in terms of, what are your values? You need to know what your values are, right? And what are your leadership desires or your outcomes? Like, what are the major goals that you have for you as a leader, for your team, and for your organization? I want you to kind of bring those to your mind right now. And I want you to think about how your daily behavioral patterns support those values or those goals. And so, as an example, if you say that inclusion matters to you, what are the actual daily behaviors that demonstrate that value in practice? So how do you demonstrate through your behaviors every single day that inclusion matters to you? If integrity is a core value of yours, what are the actual habits or the behaviors that reinforce that? If trust is something that is central to your leadership, something that you value, maybe it's a goal that you have, then how are your micro responses and your behaviors and your actions every single day communicating trust and reliability to your teams? Now, those are just a couple of examples. What I want you to do is I want you to think, this is my value, this is my goal for my team and my organization. And then what I want you to do is I want you to say, these are the behaviors that I exhibit every single day to demonstrate this value or this goal. And I want you to make sure that you are including those behaviors that are negative. And so anytime you dismiss someone in a moment, anytime you get annoyed and you just leave it and you walk away, anytime you do anything that is not in alignment with that value or that goal that you have, I want you to think about those behaviors. And I want you to think about, how often are those behaviors in alignment with your values and how often are they not in alignment with your values, right? Because when we talk about behavioral integrity, it's habitual patterns, right? Culture is formed in the habitual patterns, right? If we slip up once and we make amends and we do the things that we're supposed to do, we still have trust, or we've rebuilt trust, and it's fine. But if we are habitually repeating patterns or negative behaviors that are impacting that dynamic, then, let's say 3 times, you don't have the trust and you're never going to get it back unless you practice reflexivity and you consciously every single day are changing your behaviors and changing your actions that are trying to demonstrate that value or that goal, right? And you're checking in with people, you're getting feedback from them that you're doing it right and that you're rebuilding the trust in the way that it needs to be rebuilt, right? I won't go into that because that's another topic in another book, but the goal for this one is, are those behaviors in alignment with your values or not? And if they are not in alignment with your values, how do you make adjustments to your behaviors so that your behaviors are more in alignment with your values, right? Now, these questions are not meant to be theoretical. They're meant to be deeply practical and to help you to actually see how your behaviors are aligning with your values or your goals. And knowing that your culture is going to be shaped by what you do consistently, if you know what your behavioral patterns are, then you'll have a better understanding of whether or not you're contributing positively or negatively to that cultural dynamic. And so, how do your behaviors actually align with the values or the goals that you claim to support? And with that, I will do a really, really quick closing here, right? So your emotional intention is what is going to shape your presence. Your behavioral repetition or patterns is what is going to shape the larger cultural patterns. And your presence plus your patterns are what is going to shape the culture, right? And so let's bring all of this together now and kind of summarize it in three core areas, right? Noticing your emotions so that you can regulate. So regulate, recalibrate, and repeat. You are able to bring emotional intention to what you're feeling and regulate your nervous system in real time. That's number one. Number two is you're able to recalibrate. So you can recalibrate your behavior intentionally in the moment to make conscious micro adjustments to your behaviors that are better aligned with your values. And the third thing is to repeat. So you are consistently repeating the behaviors that are in alignment with your values, right? So even if you're exhibiting behaviors that are not in alignment, you want to make sure that you're consistently repeating the behaviors that are in alignment with your values until those patterns become your habitual patterns, right? So again, regulate, recalibrate, and repeat. We cannot regulate our emotions if we don't know what they are. We cannot recalibrate our behaviors if we don't know how to recognize our emotions and regulate our nervous system. And we cannot repeat our behavioral patterns that we want to encourage others to uphold unless we know that those behaviors are in alignment with our values and our desired goals for our teams. And so regulate, recalibrate, and repeat. This is what is going to form our emotional steadiness and our behavioral consistency. And again, trust is built in those tiny micro moments that happen every single day. And with that, I want to kind of bring us back to a really quick practice to close out. And I want you to think about a lived experience that you have in your leadership practice. And I want you to honestly and compassionately examine the relationship that you have between what you say matters and what you actually do. And I want to pose just 3 questions for you. What value actually matters the most to you right now in your leadership? And once you have that value, I want you to ask what emotional response most threatens that value when you're under stress. And once you have that answer, I want you to practice consciously reshaping. And so the next thing I want you to do is I want you to name and articulate one micro behavioral shift that you can commit to consciously practicing over the course of the next week or the next month to reinforce your alignment with that value anytime you come to that emotional response that threatens your behavioral integrity. Okay? So what's the value? What is the emotional response that threatens you in that moment? And what is one micro behavior adjustment that you can make that will support your behavioral integrity? And remember, all it takes is one shift, one recalibration. And this is how we shift the culture. If our teams can see us recognizing when we're having an emotional response, pausing and stepping back, consciously aligning our behaviors with our values, then that is going to show our team members that that is what we value and that is what we want them to also embrace, right? Ultimately, we want everyone to know how to use these skills in practice. But as leaders, these are the most important for you because you are the role models. All right. So with that, we're going to go ahead and close out. In our next newsletter, we're going to move into the fourth dimension of conscious intentionality, which is actions, the actions that we take. And this is where we're going to kind of zoom out from the personal and the relational aspects to some of our larger decisions and the systemic dynamics that come into play when we talk about the collective impact and conscious leadership as a part of that. And so, reminder, emotional steadiness leads to behavioral integrity, and that leads to cultural impact, right? So every one of you has the capacity to do this. And while we may not be perfect as we navigate this, no one is. I definitely am not, and I have been doing this for a very, very long time. I want to remind you that your nervous system is going to set the tone for your team. Your habits are going to set the pattern, and together your nervous system and your habits are going to shape the culture that people experience around you. So with that, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for leading with care, and thank you for trusting me with this topic and with exploring this with me. I'm super excited, and I hope that you will catch the next newsletter that will be out sometime around the 1st of the month.